Hello, everyone. Welcome to Triangle Be Well. I'm your host, Howard Jacobson, founder and proprietor of Triangle Be Well. We help people who are on the medical mill get off to go from medical management of disease to actual wellness. And we are really into informed consent and informed medical decision making so that you get the full range of options and the pros and cons of all of them before making a decision. And I am joined in the studio, as always, by my friend and producer, Amnon.
Hello, how are you?
I'm very well. And I want to encourage people to participate in the conversation. You can call in at 919 518 9773. There is only one even number in that entire list of 10. That's pretty amazing, don't you think? You can also Skype in at Computers 2K Voice, or if you see the chat box, if you're listening on your web browser, you can just chat in, say hello. I'm really looking forward to um, collaboration, to participation, to engagement. That'll make things way more fun, way more interesting. But until such day as folks want to engage with me and ask me questions, I will plow on ahead. So we have some unfinished business from last week. I promised two dirty little secrets of medicine, and I only gave you one. Um, and the one, if you'll recall, is that when a trial is going on, specifically we talked about oncology drug trials, but any trial is going on, the researchers who are involved in that trial are going to try to make the results look as good as possible for whoever's paying for the trial. These things are not free. Medical research is no longer primarily funded by the government, by the National Institutes of Health. It's largely paid for by pharmaceutical companies who are, or device manufacturers who are hoping to get their products approved by the FDA. And so they are paying lots of money. Either they're either doing it in-house or they're paying companies, corporations called clinical research organizations, or they're paying med schools or clinics. But any way you slice it, they're paying, and their goal is not to find out the truth, but to get their products approved first and foremost. So if you're in a trial, wittingly or unwittingly, the researchers are going to try to make their results look good for the funder, for the sponsor. And the thing we talked about was a friend of mine talking about in the oncology wards that they'll sometimes go through all sorts of torturous mechanisms to extend someone's life by 90 days because that can be reported in the literature as doubling a survivor's lifespan. If the typical lifespan after a certain point is 6 months, then adding another 90 days adds 50% to that lifespan. And that's a great number to talk to patients and their families about. And most patients who are at the end of life, when they're asked, say that they would prefer not to have gone through that. They prefer not to have the pain, the suffering, the debilitation, the the, the humiliation of the hospital experience as opposed to being allowed to live out their last days naturally at home surrounded by friends and family. But trials very often do that in order to get the numbers. So as you recall, that was the first dirty little secret. Second dirty little secret that I'll share today. At a dinner party, I was chatting with a psychiatrist, and I'm always nervous when I meet psychiatrists socially because they tend to be very good people. Most people I know go into psychiatry don't do it because they're trying to hurt people. They're honestly trying to help people. They have a very, very extensive education. Unfortunately, that education typically does not include the truth about their drugs that they prescribe. Um, and it's been very hard to find out the truth about the drugs because the drug companies, as we talked about last week in some detail, go through all manner of dirty tricks to obfuscate, hide, misrepresent, misdirect, and basically obliterate the fact that their drugs cause way more harm than good, and in some cases, almost no good. Luckily, this psychiatrist with whom I spoke was fairly up on the literature, prefers counseling to pharmacotherapy, meaning giving drugs, but said that she often will give antidepressants, specifically the SSRIs, the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, to her depressed patients as the first step in therapy. And so I gently questioned the research on that. And she said, oh, well, we all know that they don't work. We all know that they simply work as placebos. But sometimes that's what the patient needs. They need that placebo, they need that kick. They think they're going to get better, so then they start acting like they're better, and that kicks in a virtuous cycle. Because in the cognitive behavioral therapy model of behaviors, emotions, and thoughts, any one point of that triangle can influence the others. So, for example, if someone is depressed, that means they have depressed feelings, but they also have depressed thoughts or cognitions. They also have depressed actions. So, for example, someone who's depressed will tend to think things like, oh, what's the use? It's pointless. They tend to feel certain things, the symptomology of depression, and they tend to act in certain ways, as in not going out, not exercising, not doing a whole bunch of things that could help them feel better and could get them out of their depression. They tend to avoid social situations. They tend to stay home and be very low energy, which all fuel the depression. So if you give someone the SSRI and they suddenly think, well, I'm just taking a pill that's going to help, so I won't be so depressed, they may then go out. They may say yes to a dinner invitation or to a movie. They may go bowling or go for a walk or call someone that they hadn't talked to in a while. And that is what begins the healing process, because then when you start doing things that are less depressive, you start feeling less depressed, you start thinking fewer depressive thoughts, and that can, spiral into a healing cycle. And the whole thing then would be kickstarted by the SSRI as a placebo, because my friend the psychiatrist acknowledged that the SSRIs do not work better than placebos. And in fact, in meta-analysis of all the studies, have been shown to provide such a small improvement that it's clinically insignificant. Over all the studies, the difference in the Hamilton Depression Scale, the HAM-D was 1 point, and according to various studies, you need 3 points to see any clinically significant difference. And according to her, if the HAM-D score hasn't changed, hasn't improved by 15 points, why even bother? That was her clinical criterion for a successful intervention. Okay, so here was my next question. SSRIs, Prozac, etc., have known side effects. Some of those side effects we talked about last week include dependence, making it very hard to get off of them. And the remission rates for people who of depression who take the SSRIs is dismal. It's about 3% compared to somewhere between 50 and 80% of people whose depression is simply allowed to run its course. So my question is, okay, so if you're giving the SSRIs as a placebo, aren't you ethically obligated to actually give something that will do no harm? Remember last week, that's what we talked about, the do no harm principle. Okay, why wouldn't you just give a placebo? And my psychiatrist friend looked affronted and offended and said, well, that would be unethical. We can't give people placebos and not tell them it's a placebo, but you can give a drug like an SSRI that has significant known negative side effects. And you can give that because it's approved by the FDA, even though the only mechanism of action for this drug is placebo. So if that's not a dirty little secret, I don't know what is. If I were depressed and I was going to a psychiatrist, I would want them to tell me the risks and benefits of the drug. How is it any more ethical to give me a drug with negative side effects only for its placebo value than actually just give me some sugar pills and tell me that they're going to help? So we need to change the laws. We need to educate psychiatrists, but at the moment, I can do neither of those. All I can do is look at this camera, speak to this microphone, and talk to you and tell you what's up and what's down with medical practice. All right, so that was our dirty little secret. So today I got a bunch of things I'd like to cover. The one that I promised, I'm looking at my notes from last week, um, is alternative health. And when is it a good idea? When is it a terrible idea? And how to tell. And let me just interrupt quickly to remind you that you can get in on the conversation. You can call us at 919 518 9773. You can Skype in at computers 2K voice, K as in the letter K, computers 2K voice, or you can just enter a chat. How does it look like today? Anybody sticking a toe in the water to say hello?
Not yet.
Not yet. I must be scarier than I think. I think of myself as fairly approachable, but apparently nobody wants to approach me. Is it the head? Should I put on a wig or grow it back? We'll see. So alternative.
It's before Christmas. People are doing other stuff. I mean, it's slow last night.
All right. So
Don't
well.
worry about it.
All right.
Keep
Well.
going. There's still so far 370.
All right. Well.
Why they don't log into chat?
I have no idea. Maybe I should like bribe people. I give something away. Can I do that? Do people do that?
Try that.
Okay.
I tried that.
You tried
Go
that.
ahead.
Okay. So let's give away a copy of Proteinaholic to anyone in the United States. So I'm going to be a little bit of cheapskate about shipping, but if you're in the U.S. and you'd like to win a copy of Proteinaholic, reach out during this show. Either call in or Skype in or text, and we'll choose someone at random, and then we'll get your contact information and send you a signed copy, signed by me, of Proteinaholic, How Our Obsession with Meat is Killing Us and What We Can Do About It, with lead author Dr. Garth Davis. All right, we'll see if that works. Now, alternative health. So when I tell people that I am a consultant, a consultant for healthcare, and I help people make decisions, most of the time, the first thing they think is, well, I must be like a healthcare consultant for some company, helping them figure out benefits and plans. So we have that discussion, and I explain, no, that's not what I do. Then, if they're interested, I'll invite them to a dinner. There's one tonight, but it's too late to RSVP for that. But there's one on January 11th in Durham, if you'd like to come and get some free din-din and a interactive discussion on health and diet and lifestyle and wellness and all this stuff. You should go to trianglebewell.com/events, and you'll see the dinner listed right up there, and you can RSVP. So when we get around to that discussion, and I talk about the things that you've maybe heard me talk about if you've listened to me before, things like how prescription meds are almost always a bad idea as a first line of attack against, as a first line of treatment. They're sometimes okay as a first line of treatment if the situation has gotten really, really dire, to help stabilize things. Sometimes in rare conditions, the only thing that will help is a foreign pharmacological agent. But typically, we don't want to go there first. Remember the whole do no harm thing? We want to try natural solutions, and we want to try dealing with root causes as opposed to symptom management. So when we get that discussion out there, and then I talk about how doctors don't learn evidence-based medicine, and they don't learn how to read statistics and understand studies, and they're discouraged from doing their own research, and they're given information from pharmaceutical companies, from device manufacturers. Their own professional associations are largely in the pocket of these deep-moneyed interests. When we get past that point, people naturally assume that I'm into holistic health, whatever that means. For most people, it means herbs and supplements instead of pharmaceutical drugs. It means body work treatments instead of, say, surgeries. And it means all sorts of things that you would find, in a New Age bookstore, from angels and shamanic healing to tarot to Reiki to angelic healing to homeopathy to massage to vortex healing, and the list could go on and on and on. And the question is, are these better than Western medicine? So here's what I'll say. By and large, in terms of the same quality and quantity of research that we would apply to Western medicine to see if, say, a drug is effective or a particular treatment is effective, we have no idea if alternative methods work. They simply have not been subject to the same degree of scientific scrutiny as the drugs. And again, we're going to come back to this theme again and again: is follow the money. So I saw a quote that I'll share with you because it goes to this. It was on my Facebook wall, and the quote was, "If you want to understand a problem, you have to understand who benefits, not who is harmed." So someone's always benefiting from a problem. So the problem here is there's no research on alternative healing methodology. So who benefits from that? Well, on the one hand, you have their competitors, the pharmaceutical company, the surgeons, the device makers, who want to be able to say this stuff is total quackery. And when you look through the history of medicine, specifically the history of the American Medical Association and others, you can see they're basically a protectionist trade organization a lot of whose effort has gone to discrediting their competitors. One example that really blew up in their face was acupuncture, which until the 1970s was seen as ridiculous quackery. How could you possibly stick needles in someone's skin and reduce pain? How could you possibly stick needles in someone's skin and reduce pain so much that they could undergo surgery without anesthesia? And yet after the U.S. opened relations with China in the 1970s and U.S. scientists went and there were exchanges, they saw these things. They now had access to studies. Some Western universities began doing their own studies, and they found that acupuncture was actually a highly effective mechanism, even though Western medicine had no idea how it worked. Even though there was no model of the human body that explained how acupuncture could actually bring about healing. So we have in Western medicine a strong desire to not acknowledge these alternatives. And one way to not acknowledge it is say, well, there's no proof that it works. And often that's true. Sometimes it's not true. So we can't just say, well, there's no funding. So the drug manufacturers are not going to fund trials of homeopathy, of angelic healing, of Reiki. Why would they? They have no skin in the game, and they have no reason to benefit. It's like I would buy myself dinner. Why would I buy you dinner? There's no compelling reason unless there is a compelling reason. So then we have to ask, okay, so if there's no funding from pharmaceutical companies, is there no funding from anyone? So the question is, who would do the funding? And obviously there's a lot more money in drugs, but there still is money, and there are tests you can do, and there are studies you could do of various forms of healing. So for example, let's take a diagnostic modality called iridology. So iridology is the study of the patterns in your eyes to determine the health and lack thereof of various organ systems in your body. And iridologists, their claim is they'll put you in front of the big the mirror, the magnifying glass, and they'll look at your eyes and they'll have a very, very clear picture. Maybe they'll take a photograph, and then they have their whole mapping system. So down here is the liver, and this yellow spot here is the kidneys are overworked, and you need to clean out your diet because of this, and left and right eyeballs have different things to tell. And a lot of people swear by their iridologists. And as far as I have been able to tell, there are no good studies of iridology. Now, this is not something that would require a 10-year trial with clinical outcomes, including, death or disability. You could do an iridology trial pretty quickly and easily by simply having someone with a known diagnosis go to a bunch of different iridologists and see, first of all, do any of them get it right? Do they recognize that there's a correlation between the condition the person has and what they're saying? And second, is there agreement? So if you go to 12 different iridologists and each of them looks at your eye and tells you something totally different, then you can say, well, there's no objective science to it. It's simply a form of divination, like tea reading or tarot. So the question is, why hasn't that study been done? I think you could do it pretty cheaply, probably for a couple $100. But as far as I know, that hasn't been done. And so one possibility is the iridologists don't want to do it. They're not willing to put their modality up to the test of science. Another possibility is that these tests were done and were buried because they couldn't show that iridology was any better than rolling dice, or that certain treatments were any better than placebo. So, for example, a popular modality of treatment is Bach flower essences, remedies. And I did a PubMed search for Bach remedies, for flower essences, for Rescue Remedy, one of the best known. And I looked for studies, and there were very, very few. You know, compared, if you do a search for, say, diabetes or any of the diabetes drugs, you'll see dozens of studies. Here, maybe there were like 5 or 6 in the entirety of PubMed. None of them showed that there was anything other than a placebo effect, that people who were given the flower essence or people who were given something else and told it was the flower essence had no different reaction on any of the conditions that were tested. The one positive outcome for flower essences was a rodent study where they measured a whole bunch of things after 20 days, gave one group the flower and one group placebo, and at the end of the 20 days, the group on the flower had a better HDL cholesterol reading. Now, when you look at the study, they were measuring so many things that it was likely that one of them would be better just due to chance. There's no known mechanism that I can see for flower essences affecting high-density lipoprotein levels. So there's a case where there is no real evidence to support no clinical evidence to support the use of flower essences, and a couple of trials that that suggest that it's no better than placebo. Now, so the question is, what do you do with that? And so let's get to some general ideas about answering my question. When is alternative health a good idea and when is it not? So the first thing I will say is we need to get rid of this word alternative. And we know that language matters. We know that when a group is marginalized and they are given a name, that name is quickly marginalized and becomes a slur, an ethnic slur, a racial slur, a gender slur. That when you give a name to a group that's marginalized, then the name itself gets tainted. So there's been a lot of debate of what do we call it? Do we call it alternative medicine? Do we call it holistic medicine? Do we call it complementary medicine? So for me, that's all a false dichotomy, and it all implies that there is medicine, and then everything else has to be qualified. In the same way that, I thank you. Are you Aquarius? I got my,
No.
Oh no. Well, you're Aqua. Delicious. 8 cups a day, folks. Honestly, if you sleep through this whole broadcast and all you get is that you should drink water, I think I'm doing my job. So when we have something we have called medicine, that's the real thing, and then everything else has to be qualified, that's already where our problem is. So for example, if you go to the supermarket and you buy produce, you can buy produce or you can buy organic produce. Right? So produce is the real thing, organic is the one that's qualified. So you go to get an apple. What kind of apple do you want, regular or organic? Well, why isn't it regular or pesticide laden? Why isn't the organic the standard? And it's because of the power differential between people who grow pesticide laden apples and organic apples. The organic has to be qualified. And not only that, If you want to grow a pesticide-laden apple, you do not have to pay the U.S. Department of Agriculture to come and certify you as a pesticide-laden apple company. However, if you want to grow organic, you've got to go and prove that you grow organic. You've got to get labeled organic. You've got to pay money. You've got to provide facilities for the USDA inspector to come, who's going to tell you that to put the organic stamp on it, and you have to maintain that certification. And for a lot of places who do ultra organic farming, they don't even qualify because of the laws and the restrictions. So the burden there is on the person who wants to be organic. And the person who wants to just do the pesticide laden food doesn't have any burden whatsoever. So here we have in medicine, we have doctors, and then everybody else is clamoring to define themselves against the doctor, against medicine. So I think we need to get rid of that dichotomy altogether. Why don't we just say evidence-based practices and non-evidence-based practices? And then we don't have to talk about alternative or Western pharmaceutical or surgery. We can just say stuff that works, stuff that doesn't work, and stuff that we're not sure yet. And I think that is the way we need to think about these different modalities. So here's my advice. Stuff that doesn't work, we shouldn't be doing. And you can look things up. You can look up iridology. You can look up homeopathy. You can look up acupuncture. You can look at colonic irrigation. And you can see there are studies that show that some things work and some things do not work. And I'm not going to get into every single thing. Homeopathy clearly works in a lot of cases. There's been a lot of really good trials on homeopathy. Many of them are discredited by people who wouldn't believe it no matter what, who are walking around saying the sky is orange, and no matter how many blue pixels you point them to, they're not going to change their opinion. And so they'll write long, and this is sort of the skeptical websites, Science-Based Medicine and the Skeptics Dictionary. They will simply cherry pick information to say, well, it's woo-woo. We can't understand how homeopathy works, so clearly it doesn't work. If you do the research with an open mind, you'll see that homeopathy is indicated for a lot of conditions. It's not just placebo because it works on animals. There's simply no question that anyone who's open-minded could find evidence for homeopathy. Now, will homeopathy work for everything? We don't know. I'm certainly doubtful that it would work on everything, because it would be the first thing in the history of things that did. Right? So we're not talking about magic, we're talking about evidence. So if someone then says to me, well, what about iridology? Can I keep seeing my iridologist? I say, well, do you like your iridologist? And once you get your diagnosis, what does your iridologist have you do? Do they have you do, heavy metal chelation for everything? Or do they try to change your diet? Or, right? So we simply don't know. We don't have enough evidence to suggest that iridology as a science works. Now, given that there's such variability, maybe there are great iridologists, but they're working on something other than simply the principles of iridology, because if it's a science, then anyone who learns it can apply it with, if not equal effectiveness, then with at least a minimal threshold of effectiveness. And then there are things that we would tend to think would be harmful. There's a fair amount of evidence that the idea that your bowels are dirty and they need to be cleared out by artificial means, whether really powerful emetic herbs that irritate the lining and cause you to flush things out that you otherwise wouldn't have flushed out, or colonic hydrotherapy where you get a tube up your butt and it goes up and cleanses the colon, that's probably not indicated. That our bodies are going to take that as a kind of injury, and we could simply do our own cleanse by changing the way we eat. But in the West, people don't really think that way. They think, I want to do something heroic so I can keep doing what I have been doing. So back to these three things. There's medicine that works, there's medicine that we aren't sure if it works, and there's medicine that doesn't work. So here's my advice. Avoid the medicine that causes harm. So if something doesn't work, but it doesn't cause any harm, that's a different category. So maybe we need 4 categories. I'm thinking on my feet here. So medicine that works, medicine we're not sure about, medicine that doesn't help but doesn't hurt, and medicine that hurts. I would put most of Western medicine in that last category. Medicine whose risk benefit profile is negative. More risks than benefits, more side effects than symptom relief or healing. I would avoid all those. Now, for the other ones, we're not sure, and then the stuff that works, do it. If you have an issue that can be helped by homeopathy or probiotics or magnesium, and it's proven in the literature, then absolutely do it. If your personal response is positive, then everyone's different. So there's things that work in general that won't work for you because of your risk benefit profile, because of your own personal biochemistry. There's things that are very dangerous that tend not to work but might work perfectly for you. So again, we're talking about playing the odds in general. If something works for you, then do it. Now, what about the things that we aren't sure about? Here's what I would say. In general, going back to our original dichotomy, the alternative stuff and the Western stuff, the alternative stuff tends to be less concentrated, less harmful, and more natural, which means if it is not great for you, it's probably not as bad as pharmaceutical drugs and surgeries. So that's important, because if you're telling someone, if you're trying to advise someone or trying to decide for yourself, should I do this thing? We always want to ask, well, what's the risk? What's the downside? And if you're doing something that it's not going to help, but it's not going to hurt, let's just say just taking a placebo, like giving people those like fake SSRIs, giving people fake pills and telling them it's an antidepressant, it may actually help because they think it's going to help. We know that the placebo effect is a large part of medicine. That's why trials are conducted blind or double blind or sometimes even triple blind to try to control for the placebo effect so we can tell whether the thing works or not. That's one of the significant criticisms of some of the studies that I find most convincing. Let's say the Caldwell-Esselstyn heart disease reversal studies, is that he didn't have a placebo control group. Now, it's hard to know how you would put someone in a placebo group where they didn't know that they were getting low-fat, plant-based food. Maybe you blindfold people and you numb out their taste buds, or you just give everybody intravenous slurry and someone gets the standard American diet. There's certain studies that simply don't lend themselves to the kind of rigorous randomized clinical trial protocols that we like to see. But the fact is that when people think they're going to get better doing something, they often do. I think that's one of the big successes of the paleo movement, is that people for the first time say, I care about what I eat. I've got some advice. I have this understanding of how we used to eat more naturally than we eat today. And they cut out Fruit Loops and they cut out bagels and they cut out diet soda. And all of a sudden they feel better because they've cut out that stuff. But part of the improvement is simply the agency and taking control and feeling like, well, I've done something, so now I'm definitely going to feel better. There is a large part of medicine that is theater, and that's as it should be. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. If I were a doctor treating someone, I would think it's my ethical duty to create as much theater around the efficacy of my treatment as possible and let people know, absolutely, this. I'm sure this is going to work for you. There's disclaimers, there's legal things you can and can't say, and I will always advocate for tell people the risks and benefits, but there's ways to do it that whatever they end up deciding, once you give people the options, you're very fair-minded. Once they've chosen something, then your job is to help them believe that they have the greatest chance of being helped by that. I think that's, if you're not doing that, if you're saying, well, I don't think it's going to work, but try it, you might as well give up practice, because that is a nocebo effect, a negative placebo. And that's likely, even if the thing would have worked, that's likely to create a psychosomatic chain that dampens, hides its effects, and even can reverse them on a biochemical level. So once we have these things, we're not sure if they work. The question I would ask is it going to do harm? Does it have the potential for harm? For a lot of alternative treatments, the answer is no. For a lot, the answer is yes. We think that supplements are safer than drugs, but supplements are very often drugs. They're just not, based on this. They don't have the same legal requirements as over-the-counter drugs or as pharmaceutical-grade prescription drugs, but they're still drugs if we look at it from the perspective of what are they? They're synthesized in a laboratory. So the vitamin E you'll get, or the beta carotene, or vitamin C, they're not the same. They're not just taken out of foods. They are chemicals that are synthesized in the laboratory and given to us in isolation. So if I'm going to eat an apple, I'm going to get so many chemicals in that apple, so many phytonutrients, vitamins, minerals, flavonoids, things that we haven't even discovered yet. It's like an Amazon rainforest in there. Every day, someone studying an apple can discover new elements of the apple. It is unimaginably complex, and Western science is nowhere near being able, if ever, to decipher and to say, okay, here are all the parts of the apple. We've listed them all. There's no more. And here are the 5 that make a difference. But that's what we do. We'll say, okay, well, apples are good for us. Oranges are good for us. So we're going to take out the vitamin C from the orange and synthesize it in a lab. Well, we know tomatoes are good for us, and we think it's the lycopene, so we're going to give you a lycopene pill. This kind of reductionism actually leads to the creation of harmful products. There have been many, many trials of supplements that had to be stopped early because the people who were taking the supplement were dying sooner. I'll give you one example. There was a study done of tens of thousands of smokers, male smokers in Finland. Now, we know that beta-carotene levels in the blood are predictive of people who will resist lung cancer. So even if someone's a smoker, if they're eating a good diet, they will be protected to some extent against lung cancer. So the researchers thought, well, that's interesting. If people with beta-carotene in their blood are protected against lung cancer, then why don't we give smokers beta-carotene? And we'll see whether that improves their survival ratio. So a multi-year study is supposed to go for 10 years. You give a bunch of people beta-carotene, you give a bunch of people placebo, and you follow them over time, and you see how much better the beta-carotene people do. Well, the trial was stopped early. It was stopped in the middle of the 7th year because one of the groups had 46% more deaths than the other. And can you guess which group was dying more? It was the beta-carotene group. And they had 46% more deaths from lung cancer and 29% more deaths from heart disease. So the beta-carotene was killing them. It was stopped early because clinical trials have protocols to get past the institutional review boards to say that it's not ethical to keep someone in a treatment group, in a treatment protocol, when that treatment protocol is proven to be inferior to another one. As soon as you have your answer, you say, okay, stop now, let's give everybody the treatment that works, and let's stop the one that's killing people. So the trial was stopped early because beta-carotene was worse than nothing. So the question is, how can this be? We know that beta-carotene in people's blood from food was protective, and we don't really know why the beta-carotene isolate, the chemically synthesized beta-carotene, was killing people. We know that it was. There's some good theories. I could share those with you. I could say that, well, in food, beta-carotene comes not alone. It comes with lots of friends. It comes with alpha-carotenes. It comes with carotenoids, with many different forms, and all of them fit into the same cellular receptors. So if you're giving people synthesized beta-carotene, there's only one form getting in, and that blocks all the other forms. And maybe that was the problem. Or maybe the beta-carotene in the blood had nothing to do with the lung cancer, but people who have high levels of beta-carotene are people who are eating a pretty good diet. And maybe it was something else. Maybe it was the lycopene. Maybe it was the vitamin C. Maybe it was the fiber. And that the beta-carotene in the blood was simply a marker for a healthy diet, in the same way that a Mercedes hood ornament is a marker for wealth, but not a cause, right? If on the way home, if on the way out of the studio, I take Amnon's Mercedes hood ornament and I rip it off his car and I take it home, that doesn't make me rich. It just makes me very stupid and very scared.
Doesn't make I'm not rich either.
Doesn't make I'm not rich either. All right, but yet, you know, if people looked at the correlation between wealth and Mercedes hood ornaments, they might say, well, what we should do is go into the poor neighborhoods and distribute these things, and that will solve the problem. So, so very often we think that the holistic treatments, the alternative, the supplements rather than the drugs, are less harmful or not harmful at all. You know, we think of vitamins like, well, it's like an insurance policy. It can't hurt. It can only help. Right? More is better. So, you know, I don't know how many people just take their daily multivitamin just in case. And there is no evidence that this helps, except in a psychological sense, in the placebo sense. It gives people a feeling of some agency. But more is not always better, and doing something is not always better than doing nothing. Our body knows that more is not better. Our body has exquisite mechanisms for moderating our levels of nutrients from food. The trouble is that when we overwhelm our body with synthetic chemicals, it can lose the ability. We're asking it to do more than it can handle. It's like asking your Ford F-150 to haul 15 tons. It's simply beyond its capability. So, right, if you and we know that our bodies can do this because food is highly variable in its nutrient content. So, for example, you could take a couple of peaches and they could look identical, and one of them could have 40 more times of a particular nutrient, let's say a vitamin A or beta carotene, than the other, simply based on the growing season, on the soil it was grown in, on the time at which it was picked, on how it was stored and for how long it was stored, and even two identical peaches who go through exactly the same experience but are different parts of the tree will have different nutrient contents. So I don't know about you, but if I'm trying to get my nutrients based on filling out formulas and doing numbers and saying, okay, well, this I need 1,300 international units of beta carotene per day. So this peach has 400, and then I'll have to eat some spinach and broccoli, and then I'm writing it down. You'd never get it right. But your body is really good at doing that kind of calculation. And if you're low on beta carotene, it will absorb more and send more to the active sites in the body where it's needed. And if you're high, it will suppress the beta carotene absorption and utilization from food. So your body's really good at this. You are not so good at it. It's like in some of my lectures, I will bring a tennis ball and I will ask someone to catch it. And before I throw it to them, I will make sure that they are at least postgraduate level in physics, because otherwise, and math, because otherwise they simply wouldn't be smart enough to calculate the parabolic motion of the tennis ball, and they simply wouldn't be able to catch it. And of course, most people can catch without even having to think. The ball gets thrown at them, their body does all those calculations perfectly. So all that is to say that the supplements are very often, if you're just taking it for insurance purposes, or if it's for an unproven condition, very often they're going to be maybe not as harmful as pharmaceutical drugs, but sometimes as harmful, and certainly not a neutral cost-benefit analysis. They're definitely, in many cases, are worse than not taking it. And that's one reason to do research or have someone do research for you. Have we gotten any takers? Anybody?
No, but I wanted to share something.
Oh, go ahead.
You're talking about taking supplements when you don't need.
Right.
I told you I'm type 2 diabetic. 7 years ago, I started metformin,
Mm-hmm.
which leveled my sugar and also created a situation where
Mm-hmm.
and of course, you say, okay, say it works. Taking it. And in the course of things, I learned that sometimes it's good to fool the body. So you go to another medication.
Hmm.
So it's, oh, you know, so there was another, and this was a little injection, a pen. So then I went to another one, remember the name, and used that. And in the last 8 months, I was taking one like once a week. Breakthrough.
Hmm.
By
Is it
Durian.
okay?
And of course, you have to wait 8 weeks before it actually works. So they tell you.
Hmm.
And everything is fine. You know, the blood sugar is anywhere from 70 to 150, 40. Something brought me to the point where I didn't want to take it anymore. The needle. The needle was really big.
Hmm.
Because it's thick. When you inject it, it has a big needle to deliver.
Uh-huh. And where does it get injected?
I was injecting in my stomach. Even though I have some fat left, it was an ordeal.
Hmm.
So I told the doctor, I said, I don't want to take the blood. He said, okay, your A1C. There is some new ones. And he brought me some. I said, what if I don't take it? Go up. I said, let's try. So now I am at 2 months by Durian free. All I take is the metformin.
Uh-huh.
Every morning, my blood sugar is anywhere from 100 to 100. I eat, and I eat normal. Well, normal for me.
Uh-huh.
It doesn't shoot all the way to 200 like it was. Or out of nowhere, suddenly it's 60.
Right.
So here's a situation where taking a medication that was actually prescribed and I was told you need to take it to keep everything in check. Without it, it's much better. Now, I don't know how to explain that.
Right. Well,
I mean,
there's
what happened to somebody who's not diabetic who's taking that medication? Will their blood sugar go way down? I don't know. Because
right.
AstraZeneca will not explain it to you. Like, well, we can't give that. Ask
Right.
the doctor.
Right. Well, we can look and see what the mechanisms are. But you said something earlier that I think is really interesting, which was sometimes it's useful to fool the body.
Yeah.
And so if your body and you are sort of enemies, or not, that's maybe a strong word,
Right.
but
It is,
adversaries, then you're going to want to fool it, right? Then you're engaging in
Right.
like sort of like, you know, you're ex-military, right? So you know,
yeah. You don't follow a certain routine forever.
right. But and these medications, especially the ones that are working on your blood sugars, are based on the fact that your body isn't trustworthy. So, for example, if these are lowering your blood sugar, well, your brain needs glucose to survive, right? And it's every moment it's basically like breathing, right? Your brain cannot survive without glucose. You could go into a hypoglycemic coma.
Mhm.
So it's really important. So if you are using these drugs to suppress your blood glucose, there are moments when it's going to dip beyond what the brain is comfortable with, and it's going to say, "Okay, we've got an emergency here. Every glucose store in the body has got to release right now." Boom! Then it goes way up. So what happens when you go off what happened for you is you went off the drug is your body says, "Okay, well, we're being trusted here. We're eating better. We're not so scared of a hypoglycemic emergency." So therefore, we can moderate. Because anytime you do anything, right, the body is always trying to heal, right? We think in the West, I made a note. I want to talk about this next week. I'll just talk about diabetes. But as, you know, as an example, the body is always trying to heal itself. It's everything the body does is trying to get back to health, back to a healthy balance, back to a homeostasis. And diabetes is a really good example of that. We think of it as a disease, but it's only a disease because we live in an environment in which the condition for which it's helpful never ends, right? So you think about like a bear going to hibernate. It's late summer. everything is lush. There's berries, there's fruit, there's nuts, there's salmon, everything you could possibly want to eat. What does it do? It knows winter's coming. It better put on some fat. And so it's eating and eating and eating. But what if it didn't have a mechanism to stop storing the fat? Then it would get too big. It would be in danger of losing fights with other bears. If it was a human who was getting too fat, then they might not be able to climb the thing. So there's a survival disadvantage to putting on too much weight. So evolutionarily, we're like, well, we want to gain weight in the winter because we need it to survive. We can't gain too much. And the way the body does that is when the cells have enough fat in them, then they become insulin resistant. And so insulin resistance is the body's way of saying, okay, now your blood sugars are high, your cells are full, cut back on the food, stop eating. And that was easy when what we were eating was fruits, nuts, berries, seeds, basically like bears. A little bit of lean meat that we had to run and catch and expend as many calories to catch it as we could possibly hope to get from it. And now we live in a 24/7 summer. But it's not just 24/7 summer, it's hyper summer, right? Our ancestors didn't have Snickers bars or Waffle House. So we're having these artificially rich foods that are that basically, it's like everywhere you turn, it's like a honeycomb with no bees in it, right?
So you can eat it.
Yeah. So, and you can eat as much as you want, whenever you want. And so what was an exquisitely tuned mechanism to get us just fat enough to make it through the winter without compromising our ability to survive due to overweight has become a disease called diabetes because there's a mismatch between our environment and what our bodies evolved as a success strategy. So pretty much everything the body's doing is trying to get back to health. So the way we do that is, and here we get back to evidence-based medicine, is when we change our diets, when we change our lifestyle, when we go back to living the life, or as close as we can get to the life in which our bodies evolved. So more movement and more plants, less processed food, less animal foods. Type 2 diabetes is largely reversible. Whereas if you are simply maintaining your blood sugars, that's a symptom of diabetes. That's not a cause. So anyway, that was a welcome digression there, because I get to talk to you instead of talking to the Logitech. So next week we'll talk all about diabetes. And that will be fun. And so if folks know anyone with diabetes, or you have type 2 diabetes, or even type 1, we can talk about that as well, or type 1.5, which is an interesting hybrid. So be sure to tune in next week. So here's the last thing I'll say about the alternative health is there's a whole bunch of stuff we simply don't know. There's not been enough research to say, well, this works, it doesn't work, we don't know. What about that stuff? So here's what I would say. Don't use it as an excuse to not do stuff that works. So don't say, okay, well, here is a pill that can help me. It's natural. It comes from an herb that I've never heard of that's grown in the mountains somewhere by people who live to 140, because that's all marketing, right? So this herb, it might help, but if you're going to take it like a pill, like a Western drug, and not address the cause, then I would say that's not a good idea. In other words, whatever your condition is, it's not due to a deficiency of this pill. So if the pill may help, but don't let it block your efforts to truly get well. And I would say that is the main thing. That homeopathy can certainly help with a lot of symptomology. Massage, Reiki, foot reflexology maybe can help with certain things, but they're not the cure. The lack of them isn't what caused the problem in the first place. So make sure whatever you're doing, that it's buying you time to do the evidence-based stuff, which is almost always lifestyle-based, almost always habit-based, almost always changing your interaction with the environment. Second thing is, if you have a condition for which there is no Western treatment that works, and I'm speaking about late-stage cancers, terminal cancers, there's no reason not to try anything. So, if someone has a cancer they've been told is inoperable and they need to go to palliative care, it means that, to go home to be comfortable to die, and they want to live, and they want to go to the Gerson Clinic in Mexico, which is seen as quackery and dangerous by Western medicine, and they have family members who are trying to talk them out of it. Why on earth? Why would you talk someone out of something when there's nothing else available to them? And that's something that Western medicine does with an embarrassing frequency. So it's like, well, they acknowledge we don't have anything for you, but that other stuff isn't any better. Well, we don't know that, and it's certainly not going to hurt. And it's, the Gerson protocol is actually a pretty good way to live, but for the most part, in terms of the food you eat, in terms of the rest, in terms of relaxation, in terms of drinking water, in terms of removing toxins from the body. To say that that's quackery is itself quackery. There's a lot of projection going on, and again, by people who are protecting their turf. So I'm looking at the clock. We are pretty much out of time. I want to thank everyone for tuning in this week, all you hundreds of people who are silently stalking me on Nissan Communications. I appreciate it. I hope one day you will feel comfortable enough to reach out. Next week, diabetes, the 28th of December, same time. We're on, right? No holidays for us. We got to get the word out. Yep. If you want to find out more about what I do, please go to trianglebewell.com. You can sign up for events. Some are free, some are paid. You can get in touch with me, ask questions. What I do is I help people make good decisions about their health, not based on me getting paid by drug manufacturers or device makers or by anyone or food manufacturers. I get paid by you. So my advice is unbiased and simply providing the evidence and teaching you how to do your own research so that you can be an informed consumer of healthcare and live your best life. And as always, thank you, Amnon.
No, thank you.
And everybody have a happy holiday season. Merry Christmas. Happy Boxing Day. Happy Sylvester. Happy New Year. Well, I'll see you all before then. And everybody be well, my friends.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. Our weekly lineup of call-in programs includes Computers 2K Now with Amnon Nissan, Health In with Debbie Bruck, Breaking Free with Marilyn Shannon, Lessons of Vietnam with NCVVI members, The Tanya Love Show, Your Healthy Pet with Gisela DiCarlo. And if you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it at www.nissancommunications.com. Sponsored by Atomus.com, makers of quality video recorders and converters for professionals, CarolinaApparel.com, and DeltaForce.net.